Are we ready? Yeah. Are we on? Are we live from IAFP? Woo! Welcome to the very first hybrid webinar event from the Alliance to Stop Foodborne Illness and the FDA. Hello, all of you in webinar land. Looks like we have about 400 people joining us, and we are adding to the room all the time. Please come in, take a seat. My name is Vanessa Kaufman, and I am the director of the Alliance to Stop Foodborne Illness, and I will be serving as one of your co-hosts today, along with Chris Waldrop from the FDA. We've planned the session to dive into a lot of the questions that you all have been asking, and we've just been running out of time for. So we've got those questions pulled up, but we really want you to also be asking questions. So folks in the room, get your questions ready, and folks online, if you haven't been with us before for a webinar, you're going to put those into the Q&A. And then you're going to start upvoting people's questions, and we'll start answering the ones that rise to the top. So the chat function's disabled, your microphone's disabled, your video's disabled, but you're able to put stuff into the Q&A, and we will get to those questions. I think today is going to be really wonderful. We've got a great panel here with regulators, people from academia, industry, tons of experience here to answer your burning food safety culture questions. And I think now I'll turn it over to Chris to introduce himself.
Yeah, thanks. Hi, I'm Chris Waldrop. I'm a senior health scientist at the Food and Drug Administration. So we're very happy to co-host this webinar with the Alliance to Stop Foodborne Illness. Thank you all very much for coming. The cool thing about doing this live at IAFP is not only do we have a bunch of great experts online, but we have a bunch of great experts in the room. So we really want this to be a discussion, a conversation. We have our folks here at the front, but we want this to be a back and forth. So you all have expertise in this issue, or you all have questions in this area. Let's all talk about it together as one big happy food safety culture family. So before we get started, just so you know who all is here at the front, I'd like to ask each one of our panelists to just very briefly introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Phil Bronstein. I am the Assistant Administrator over Field Operations for the Food Safety Inspection Service.
My name is Lone Jespersen, and I am principal at Cultivate SA, based in Switzerland.
Hello, everyone. My name is Gillian Kelleher, and I'm with Kelleher Consultants. I'm a long-time industry person in retail, in manufacturing, and food service, and delighted and honored to be here today.
Hello, I'm Conrad Choinière. I direct the Office of Analytics and Outreach at the Center for Food Safety and Applied Nutrition, and I'm co-leading the New Era Food Safety Culture core element, along with my colleague Don Prater, who can't be here today.
And unfortunately, Roberta Wagner from Consumer Brands Association also couldn't be here. I know she was on the agenda, but she did submit a question. So let me read that and let you all answer. So Roberta's question is, while robust food safety cultures should prevent food contamination events, they may still happen. What types of behaviors do you expect of a company that has a robust food safety culture if it appears they may or are implicated in an outbreak, or when they have to execute a Class 1 recall? Additionally, what types of behaviors would you expect of regulators in the same situation?
Okay, I'll endeavor to go first on this one.
Go for it.
All hands on deck. If you got an issue going on in your company, the customer is what matters, and you have your processes and you have your procedures in place, and you have to have a sense of urgency. You have to be all about doing what's right. You have to be about the consumer. It's ever changing. The news is, the information's trickling in. You're learning more by the minute. All hands on deck, all over it, conscientious, protecting your consumer. That's what I would say.
I think I would add to your answer, Gillian, by saying I would expect to see a CEO that stands up in the media publicly and takes responsibility, a CEO that makes sure that his or her organization is listening more than acting at the beginning, so that there's control over the situation that's being coordinated. I would also expect to see a manufacturing or production lead take complete control over containment, making sure that not more product goes to the field so that anybody gets sick. And then I would expect to see a dedicated resource or resources, depending on the size of the organization, to really organize and lead the battle, to say it the way it is in those situations.
I guess from a regulator perspective, I think we would expect to see a willingness to cooperate. That there would be some openness and transparency, no walls put up. Sometimes I think we've encountered that where it's sort of like they close ranks and they don't really aren't free with their information and sharing information with the regulator.
Yeah, and I guess I would echo that. So I think that the most important thing is that we all, if a situation like that happens, regulators and the company, my expectation is that everybody realizes the goal at that moment is to get product that is adulterated off the shelves and away from the consumers as quickly as possible. And I think that the data that you have internally is important to share with the regulators. The regulators need to hear what you're doing, see what you're doing, see what the analysis is. We not only want to be able to identify potentially effective product, we also want to be able to rule out good product that's safe and still going to be able to reach the consumers. And the only way we can do that is through sharing information between industry and the regulators. We have a large team of folks that if this does happen, we have a group of folks in the Food Safety Inspection Service that come together. They're experts in this, is what they do every day. They will analyze the data with the companies, and then we will quickly, and the more data we have to share, the quicker we can get to the conclusion about what that product is that is affected and get it out of commerce. So I think that's the key piece to the food safety culture, is that willingness to say, at this point, the regulator and the industry should be simpatico, one mission: get that product out of the marketplace.
Great, thanks. We'll go to the room first. Any burning questions you want to ask and talk about with food safety culture?
Thank you. I'm James Kinchlow with Center for Science and Public Interest. How do you prioritize food safety culture in your hiring practices? I'm talking both hiring people who are working on the line, but then also at the management level, hiring people who can lead a good food safety culture at your company.
What was your name, sir?
James Kinchlow.
Thank you, James. I think you need to look at not separating food safety culture from your organizational culture. So you need to say that you are interviewing, you're hiring, whether that's a frontline team member, it's a line supervisor, it's a manager in a plant, it's a manager in a supporting function. You hire and onboard individuals into your organizational culture. And your challenge is to make sure that food safety is part of what's important to your business. So you get people in and you say, this is who we are, this is our identity. Part of our identity is that we protect the safety of our consumers. And this is what that means specific to your role, the role that you're going to be in. So I think that specificity of what's expected of you in your role that you're coming into in the context of who we are as an organization in our organizational culture, I think is important. Because I think what I see a lot is that we have onboarding into that food safety is important to us. Food safety is our number one priority. And the fact with that statement is that one size does not fit all. One size fits nobody. So I think in that hiring and onboarding, you make sure that it's very clear what is actually your responsibility and our expectations of you when it comes to food safety as part of who we are, as part of our organizational identity.
And I would say from the regulator side, we use it as almost a retention tool. I mean, the idea of a food safety culture, it kind of goes hand in hand with the public health regulatory agency for food. It's why we're there. It's our mission. It's integrated throughout our mission in FSIS, from the acts and how we implement them to the regulations that we propose and how we implement them. That's all ingrained. And so I started off my career as a microbiologist. I'm a PhD microbiologist. I was in agricultural research service. I went to the Office of Public Health Science to begin my career with FSIS. And then I moved over to field operations. And I'll tell you, the best part about being in field operations is I get to go out in the field and talk to my inspectors, and every single one of them are so proud of the mission and so proud of their job, which is integrally linked to the food safety culture of our institution, our agency internally, and it's also what they get to promote amongst the establishment. So and with industry and in their conversation. So I would say for us, it's key. I'm not as agile. I can't adjust salaries as quickly as the private industry can. I can't give a lot of different things. It's a federal government. I'm stuck to some strict rules on hiring and how I can compensate people. But I really always like to focus on that key part about what you're doing for the American consumer, which is key to that food safety culture.
I love both of your responses. I would also add that the values of the company really, really matter. So when you're hiring, you want somebody who has the right attitude. You want somebody who embraces what the company is all about, and the consumer. It's all, you know, service focused, consumer focused, high standards, all that sort of thing. So I think that would be part that I would add to some great answers here already. Okay.
And what I would add is that we are trying to look at what our food safety culture means for a regulatory agency. And, you know, I think there's no question that everyone that works at FDA values food safety and values public health. So that's that hurdle that I think maybe manufacturers might be facing. We don't have that. What's the next hurdle, right? The next hurdle is like, okay, well, how do we operationalize it in a way that makes us more effective at what we're doing? And that kind of gets at some of what your organizational culture that you were talking about, roles, responsibilities, this feeling of empowerment, for instance, that you want to give everyone in the agency at whatever level. And you know, we didn't get to the second half of the question that Roberta, and I know she's going to be angry if we don't answer it. So I think that might be a good segue to, you know, for, you know, what do we expect out of regulators during an outbreak, right? You know, what are the behaviors you want to see out of regulators? And I'm not going to answer that question. I want to hear from you all, what is it that you know, from your perspective, an agency that is exemplifying good food or strong food safety culture during an outbreak, what kind of behaviors would you expect to see?
Can I tack something on to James's question before we go
Yep.
there, Conrad? James, I also think that we need to just make sure that when we are bringing new people into our wonderful companies and organizations, that we make food, or we handle food, or we ship food. It's incredibly personal. My first career was in the automobile industry. I made foam. I mean, we make food, and everybody depends on that safe food is available for their survival. Their basic needs are met by what we do every day. We have a client that they took that to the nth degree. They have open houses every day. They invite their family and friends of those that work in the factory into the factory. While they're there, they have a professional photographer that walks around, takes photos. Those photos, they become posters on the walls. So the next 12 months, there's Jimmy with his daughter, Sue, looking at the machine that he operates every day. All of a sudden, that machine that's wrapped up in stainless steel and sanitized every night is no longer just some machine. No, that's where Jimmy was with his, so you personalize it. I think that's what I would recommend as well.
So we're already asking questions of each other. This is good. Keep that momentum going. I like it. We're gonna go to one of our virtual attendees and get a question from them, and then we'll come back to the room. So Vanessa?
Yes, John Gray asks, what are some reliable, objective tools that measure food safety culture in the very basic levels of manufacturing? Lone.
Yeah, I was going to say I'll defer to Lone on that one.
I think what was that name?
The askers, the John Gray.
John. Thank you, John, for that very often asked question. I think if you look at assessing food safety culture, and if you want to quantify where your food safety culture is at today, then you have to do one of two things. You can look across the market. There's some commercial solutions out there with any measurement tool. And this is my favorite soapbox. I often fall off. You have to make sure you educate yourself on, is this a reliable and valid method for your need? Selecting a culture measurement tool is no different than selecting a listeria detection method. Would you select a method for that without it being validated to actually detect listeria? So do your homework, look at peer-reviewed papers, look at how others have applied that tool. So look, there's commercial tools out there. I'm not going to mention any of them here. The second thing that I think we need to do much more of than what we do today is we have to link cultural performance to our food safety KPIs. So what are we actually measuring to measure the performance of food safety in the first place? We might be looking at customer complaints, EMP performance. We might be looking at cost of quality. We might be looking at near misses. There's all these food safety KPIs that ultimately, if we do the job right, when it comes to maturing our food safety culture, we're going to see an improvement in those food safety KPIs. So I would just say, I would look at those two. Select a tool, but certainly also look at your food safety KPIs.
But Lone, you and I had this discussion earlier in the conference, and I think Phil and I have had similar discussion. We've done a lit review at the scientific literature around food safety culture, the measurement of food safety culture. And one gap that we've identified is that last step. Does the tool that you are using to measure food safety culture actually predict better food safety performance? You know, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done there, like, and maybe we can figure out a way to collaborate. I know Phil and I have been talking about collaborating to try and see if we can tease that out, but working with industry as well to tease that out, because maybe some of these tools are measuring, I don't know, how many items might you measure in one of these assessment tools, Lone? No?
Well, if we look at some of those tools that are in peer reviewed, again, I'm not going to start talking about specific measurement tools here, but if we look at some of the peer reviews that are out, journals that are publishing these papers, you might be looking at 5 dimensions, 17 factors, right?
Right. But maybe only 4 of them matter.
Exactly.
So maybe we can figure out a way to identify what those 4 are and get much more efficient tools that are easier to use.
Yep. And it's not uncommon, and you know this as well, Conrad, that when the level of maturity that we're at right now on this topic in the food industry, we have tools that can quantify, and we have shown repeatability with those tools. We have shown, I think there's one paper out that shows predictive validity. And that's where we want to be, right? We want to say that we have tools that can actually predict these improvements in food safety. But Conrad, I'm going to take you up on that, and I think we should collaborate on that. And I'd suggest we bring SALIS into that. That's the science network where there's 21 scientists in one group that does research in this area, and bring them in, pose the challenge to them.
I think this is great collaboration going on here, and a great opportunity to drive food safety culture forward in terms of measurement and in terms of continuous improvement and what have you. I would just speak from a very practical perspective. I've been very, very fortunate in my career. Maybe I choose some of these companies along the way to work with companies that I would believe have a good food safety culture, that live it every day, that take pride in their work, that want to produce food that they would be comfortable serving to their own families. So a sense of ownership. You talked about it earlier, Phil, a sense of pride. Measuring all that customer complaints, proximity to your consumer trust is massive. There are a whole lot of metrics out there that companies do use, either in the retail space or the manufacturing. Okay, good. And I'm on a roll here. Or in the manufacturing space, but I love where you're going, because that's only going to strengthen it further, especially for those companies where maybe it's in its infancy or they're well intended, but there are companies out there that have mature food safety companies, but they always want to be better.
So I'll add one more that's going to be a little bit iffy here because the analysis isn't done on our side. But in FSIS, we've seen a decrease in the number of recalls in recent years. And this is, in my opinion, no small part dealing with food safety culture. So I will tell you that the recommending of a recall is the last step in our investigation process. We have many steps prior to that. The number of incidents that we analyze in our recall management staff hasn't really changed significantly over the years. However, what we see is the number of things that we have to recommend a recall with has. Now, what does that mean? FSIS hasn't changed the way it's done recalls, and there's no new standard by which we would recommend a recall. What this means to me is that the establishments are, number one, identifying earlier, taking corrective actions quicker, and having that product under their control before it gets to the point where the regulatory agency has to say, this product is adulterated out in the market and we're recommending a recall. So I think overall, there's a lot of steps between food safety culture and that metric there. But I will say that there are some tantalizing trends that if you think at that data, this may very well be an actionable metric that we can demonstrate, a food safety culture works.
Great, thank you for that. Yeah, from the room.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Gina Nicholson Kramer. I'm with the Ohio State Center for Foodborne Illness Research and Prevention. And my question is, I know many people in the audience, both virtually as well as here in the room, have worked for food safety and quality departments or regulatory programs, food safety, that have a very dysfunctional culture within that program. My question is, do you look at that? To me, that's a more important part of developing a food safety culture. How do you improve that culture within your food safety program first before you start measuring the food safety culture within your organization? What are your comments on that and approaches you might have to fix that culture?
You take that one. Okay.
Gina, thank you. I can't see you. There you go. If I understand you correct, so how do you look at the culture within your food safety and quality department before you start measuring? Is that correct? Yeah, yeah. I love that you went there. It's a little bit of that be the change you want to see. How many people in this room is in food safety and quality? I just need to see how many people are going to beat me up after this. I do firmly believe, and I say this respectfully because I also have been in your shoes, we have to take a really good hard look at ourselves. And it's because we have been the ones that have owned and acted on these programs to some extent in vacuum without the rest of our organizations for a long, long time. So now we're the ones that all of a sudden have to share that with others, and we're going to have to rely and we trust other people to do their part in our food safety and quality assurance programs. That's a change. That's a huge change for us. I did a workshop with a large global company a little while ago, and we sort of agreed on that it felt a little bit like being with a group of the last dogs in a pound to be adopted, right? Nobody loves us. I mean, we're sort of sitting back and nobody likes us. So I think it's really important to go in and look at, so what's driving that kind of mindset and behaviors in your food safety and quality assurance department? Get somebody, bring in your HR department, bring in somebody, partners from within or from outside, and start saying, okay, so what are our current behaviors? What are driving our current behaviors? And how do we change those so that we can be the change we would like to see in others, right? I mean, you've got a person sitting right behind you there that can speak to this, how you do that very successfully as well. So maybe we need to tap Steve on the shoulder here to add an answer to it as well.
Great answer. I would add to that as well. If you are indeed dealing with the dysfunctional department or whatever, kind of out of sync with everyone, all of this food safety topic and quality, it comes from the top. Okay, and the people who work in the quality and food safety organization need to be proud of where they work. Okay, and they need to walk the talk, and they need to be accessible, and they need to be good communicators, and they need to like live it. But what I notice big time, and it doesn't matter if it's manufacturing or it's retail, is coaching and educating, not being the police. So you're the food safety people, but you're not coming in with learned this decades ago. All right. You don't come in with a hammer. You come in with how can I help you kind of thing. That goes an awful long way. That gives you credibility. You're out there doing assessments, walkthroughs, you're coaching, you're training, you're educating, you're leading by example. And that gives off the kind of positive feedback. Oh my God, they're there to help us. So if it's dysfunctional, you might have to weed out some people too. If it's not a particularly well respected or recommended organization. So there are just some suggestions Gina I would have.
Hi, all. I'm Steve Hermansky. I spent years in the food industry and I've now joined the FDA. So Conrad's allowed me to join. So I will answer just to say that been in the situation. And you're right. It is about coaching, teaching, but you cannot be afraid to change personnel because there are and it starts at the top of a plant. If your plant manager does not support food safety first, nobody in that organization, no matter what you say, it will trickle down that that's not important. So you do have to make that decision. And you also have to recognize you're making food. And you have to remember that every time somebody walks into that facility, they have to say to themselves, will I be proud of what I make? And will I be willing to feed this to my family, my grandkids, my children? Because it's surprising when you ask people how quickly food can become a widget, and you forget that you're making food. So, you know, the redundancy of the messaging over and over again, and it can't be the same message day after day. You've got to change the message, because otherwise it just becomes, what is that? The teacher and Charlie Brown, wah, 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 wah. So because it does become that. So you have to constantly reinvent food safety in an organization and sell it differently. But, you know, you'll be surprised when you fire one plant manager, how quickly the rest of them come to say, you know what, this is actually pretty important. And so that's really what it takes, is consistency in messaging and rewarding people for making good decisions. And I could give lots of examples, but I won't take the time here.
So
Steve, if I can just add to what you just said and tag a question on for Conrad and for Phil here. I also think, Gina, it's about acknowledging that as food safety and quality professionals, we might never have been taught what it means to inspire, motivate, the psychology of others, the sociology of a plant. So it's a whole new language, right? So we got to stimulate some curiosity and make sure that that becomes part of the competencies of food safety and quality professionals as well. And I guess that's my question for Conrad and for Phil as well. So you must see something similar within your agencies, that you have great scientists. How do you get them to acknowledge that? I mean, I hate to say softer side because I actually don't like terming it that way, but
that was going to be my question for you. You know, it is a challenge because, you know, we're not anthropologists, and usually when you're talking about culture, you're talking about, you know, and most people aren't even aware of their own culture, right? So like, in order to be able to change your culture, you need to know where you are right now. And a lot of culture is not written down that this is their culture, which is part of the problem, right? And I think I would assume with a food safety culture, you are writing down, these are our expectations, these are our values, and these are how we operationalize our values. And I know with us, we're a very large organization. I know that Steve comes from a very large organization. It's harder to get that many people on board. And my question for you all, which is related, I think, is I heard Steve say it, I heard you just say it, and I've heard many others say it, that it starts at the top. But I'm questioning if it really starts at the top. I think to have a successful food safety culture, you need to get the top on board. But does it really start at the top? Or does it start more in the middle with some core believers that then spread it, you know, up and down the chain? It obviously can't ultimately be successful and fully ingrained unless you get the top on board. But in your experience, did it really start there?
So we actually have a question. If I'd like to add on one question from our virtual attendees that gets just at that, like, how do you convince the top to get on board with food safety culture? But then I'd like the group to answer Conrad's question as well. So Vanessa.
Chris, our question, which I just accidentally hit. Okay, so Jose Sabal asks, Any ideas on how to educate senior management, top management to make sure they understand their food safety responsibilities? And then there's a tag-on question that asks how we get that education to trickle down through the company.
I'll start. Managing up is always hard, as we all know. I mean, that's one of the keys. That's that it's. I don't know what the answer to that one is. I will say I'll try to answer that one a little bit and talk also. We were just joking up here earlier, but as regulators and FSQAs, we have similar outlooks and positions in our companies. If anybody's too happy with us, we're probably not doing our job too well. So everybody needs to be a little bit upset with us. I worked with a microbiologist who was a FSQA before she joined our agency, and she said they always hated me. And I said, well, why? She's like, I could always find Listeria. And the operations people were so mad because I would go to every place I could and I would find Listeria, and then they would get mad at me. And she said, I would always turn to them and say, well, I wouldn't be a very good microbiologist if I couldn't find find Listeria somewhere in this environment. And so I think that's a piece of it. And to those of you who know, Dr. Goldman used to be with FSIS as Office of Public Health Science, AA, and then was most recently with FDA. He retired, but I will, as an homage to him, I will talk to one of the things he loved to talk to us about, which is that we are on a path of betterment. And I feel like food safety culture has to embrace that also. This is a path of betterment. It's not a destination. It's the way we go. It's the way we work. It's the way we implement. It's the way we act. And so as a FSQA person or a regulator, we always have to be looking because there's always a vulnerability. And so we always need to be seeing where are those vulnerabilities and how can we address them. Now, it's really hard to try to put that into a monetary or an operational kind of context. And that's where the culture piece comes into, because they are there. It does happen. A recall is very damaging to the brand. It's very damaging to monetarily to get all the product back, the destruction of the product, and then also the damage to the brand. And I think we just have to realize that we just never want that to happen. And measuring something that doesn't happen is always very difficult to do. But I think we all can visualize it. And we all do need to try to remember, like, this is the goal. The goal is to never have that happen. It will, but we want to get on that path of betterment to make it less and less frequent and less impactful when we do. So I think it's really important that as for the FSQAs to remember that your job as part of food safety culture is to always be looking and always be trying to think of how can we do this better? What else aren't we thinking about? It's easy to say that piece of equipment's the problem piece of equipment in this establishment, and make sure that thing's clean. But what's happened to the left and what's happening to the right, we need to know that process too, and to make sure that you are always being kind of careful looking around.
There were so many questions here, but I honestly, I would say it absolutely comes from the top. And I'll speak for myself, okay, very privileged over the years. I kind of formed over time a need with any employer I worked for. I kind of saw it happening, that the employees were proud of who they worked for. The customer was held in the highest esteem, and I could make a difference. Okay. And I found that every step of the way. I worked with Häagen-Dazs back in Europe, and it was, at the time, their motto was dedicated to perfection. So it didn't matter if it was food safety, it was across the board. I was very fortunate to work with Wegmans. I think Danny Wegman, chairman of Wegmans, sums it up very nicely when he says, if you're a food company, food safety better be your #1 priority. And then you align your strong food safety department, plus you engage operations, plus everything is operations owned or manufacturing owned. So everyone's working in that direction. And Stephen, lovely to see you, by the way. Very good to see you. Stop. We're working for stuff. And you put a face on it. So you talked about always staying on top of it. Maple Leaf, Randy Huffman from Maple Leaf talks about avoiding complacency. And by putting a face on food safety and what happens when it goes wrong, that's powerful. And that's where STOP can help. And that's kind of why I'm here as well.
So I'm going to disagree a little bit with my friend and colleague here. I'm not going there because he hits. And sort of jump a little bit where you were going, Conrad. Heskett is one of the researchers in organizational culture out there, and he has clearly established that organizational or CEOs decide to make change to their culture because of external pressure. So if there's an external pressure on an organization, that's when they decide to make change. So when we talk about food safety culture, it's not necessarily an external pressure, right? It's there might be an audit requirement, an inspection requirement, but you don't want to make change to your culture because you want to be compliant. You want to make change to your culture because you have better control of your risks and retain your employees. I think we actually need to go to look at, so Benjamin Franklin talked about the middling people. He talked about that what made a society really run well and effective was because there was a group of middling people, those carpenters and shoemakers in the middle that were really good at what they did, and they could deliver under the governance or the rules of governance, but they made sure that everybody had shoes on their feet as much as possible. And I think we need to take that analogy into food companies, because what I see is that there's a lot of companies that start this, they get a lot of energy going because they get the CEO on a video, and then nothing. We get to that point when in fact what we have to do, we have to get managers and supervisors who feel that they have the knowledge and they have the power to make decisions for food safety every day. And that doesn't come because we have a charismatic Michael McCain saying once or twice that this is important. It comes because it's filtering throughout large, small organizations in a consistent and a transparent way, like we talked about before. So I'm sort of with Conrad a little bit on this one. I think you can probably initiate a focus or decide to change, but when it comes to making that change and impacting that we make food safe every day, then we got to get to the middle.
So that's a happy medium.
Jillian.
Maybe there's room for both. There's always going to be companies that, well, it depends.
So let's take another question or comment from the floor.
Thank you so much. This is Dina Scott with Wendy's. And I want to just add a little spin for the panel. Of course, if you know anything about Wendy's, we're a global company, but we deal with a vast majority of franchisees. And, you know, it's one thing to have a food safety culture and drive expectations and brand standards from your point of view, but I'd like to know your insight. I'm looking at you, Lone, for positively affecting, you know, these hundreds of franchisees who, of course, the number one thing on their mind is revenue.
Oh. You had to ask that, didn't you?
The questions are only
Yeah.
going to get harder.
I like it. I think we probably have to dive into our social science toolbox, and Conrad can speak to this one as well. And then I think we need to say, so, okay, why is it that we decide to behave in certain ways? So we have triggers. Triggers activate a thought. Thoughts activate actions. Our actions have consequences. So I think there needs to be some messaging from Wendy's to say, well, these are our expectations. Those are triggers, right? But then there needs to be some consequences if you don't see those select or defined behaviors that results in the food safety performance you want to see. So I think you can probably go in and then work with your partners in the restaurants and say, what do you think as a store manager are the food safety behaviors that we should expect of all of us when we walk in as customers into a wonderful Wendy's restaurant, right? So I think you can't dictate what they're supposed to make their culture like, but you can certainly influence them by saying, here are our requirements like you do already, and here are some tools for you to understand better what are some of the behaviors that you would want to see, because you also have a stronger restaurant that'll impact your financial performance if you also have strong food safety. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to me, well, I'm an economist by training, and so I don't know what control Wendy's has with their franchisees, but, you know, internally, what I think a lot of companies what I hear, what they're doing is a system of incentives and I don't want to call them punishments, but disincentives, right? So some simple incentives are like recognizing the employees, right? So maybe you have some recognition program with the franchisee, or you could have some sort of disincentive. Maybe you have a naughty list, I don't know, or something like that. And then maybe you need to offer some resources, maybe by way of training or consultants that are able to talk about organizational culture and what that means for food safety. I'm just some ideas, I mean, that I have.
We'll take another question from the room and then we'll go to to our virtual group. Thank you.
Hi, Richard Fleming, Sage Media. Conrad, I wanted just to quickly answer that you'd asked, what do we
Thank
want out of an agency? And I would just say proactivity versus reactivity. It's like the main thing for me. And the second aspect of what I would want leads into my question, which is, I think that there needs to be some kind of more linear narrative around what's happening. Recently, you know, with the whole baby formula thing, you ask anybody what their opinion is on it and they have a different perspective. And I'm finding that it's very easy to demonize specific agencies or companies and reduce these events to a very simple narrative, because the narrative is not linear, it's not easy to follow. So the public at large is just like, well, it's greed, or it's this amorphous government agency, and it does a really big disservice. So one of the things I'm wondering is, how do we balance information with action as we start to have these awareness campaigns? What are the actual things that are simplified that the consumers can do, so that everyone, and agencies can do, medical professionals, everyone can kind of contribute to that like last mile of food safety, of the food safety journey?
Are you going to answer?
No, I'm going to let you start.
Oh, I think it's a great question. And I think it's a constructive question. It's like, what can we do better? How can we engage? How can we come together and tackle the different parts of that? So I just think it's one worth mulling over. I don't think I have all the answers. I think you'll get some answers here. I'm quite sure. Are you ready now?
I can go a little bit. So I love the question, and it's a hard question to answer. Obviously, I mean, this is about, once again, betterment. I think it's really important. We talked a little bit about transparency, and I think that, you know, part of the culture between a regulator and an industry, when you have a positive food safety culture, is the willingness to share information. I think that information is very important. We have to be transparent. It helps us get to the conclusion quicker. One of the things that is always hard and people are concerned about, the fears of sharing, is that it will be used against me. Well, I would say that used against me and used properly are the two sides of the same coin, right? I mean, I can't use it properly if you can't be used against you, right? So for instance, if you were a company to say, I'm going to share my data with me, and I make a great regulation out of it, I could be using it against you. But if you didn't share the information, I could make a terrible regulation, which could really impact your business. So you know, it's important that we have that trust and the transparency and that moving of data, so we can make the right decision. So the important part here is that this is a balance, especially if there's a public health crisis going on. If there are illnesses, if there are people, we need to have the data. We need to see the data, but we cannot react to a data point without analyzing it with the other data points. We've seen time and time again where one data point says, obviously you're the problem, we'll go there. And then we've fixed the problem. The outbreak is still ongoing. We've damaged the good product, and we still have other product out here that's in the market. So I think we also have to have discipline on the side of the, what do you expect from the regulator? I would say what I expect from my people as regulators is that we are listening to the data, to people that have the data, talking about the data, what it means, and letting everybody understand. So it is incumbent upon us as a group of people that are dealing with an issue is to not only have the data, look at the data and analyze it before we take actions which may or may not be directly mitigating the hazard that we see. So I think it's a hard question, because it's not going to be easy. More data isn't always better data, right? I mean, sometimes you have too much noise in the system, and that's a classic outbreak problem, which I'm not an epidemiologist, so I won't go into that, but that we just have to look at all that data in total and make what we really want to do is make fast, accurate decisions. And that's the hard part about it. Sometimes more data helps, sometimes more data is harmful. Seeing the products, like the end products, the flavorings, they see the result of it, and that their family actually consumes that. Yeah, humanized it, personalized it. I agree. So I just wanted to ask if you could like tweak that a bit to speak to more of that messaging or narrativization. Yeah. Well, I think obviously it's the reason why we all do what we do as regulators. It is that person, and we were actually been working with STOP to try to integrate more of their messages into my onboarding of my inspectors, and so that we have that. So you remember, this isn't an us versus them; it's everyone for the consumer. And so those pieces of data, those stories, those feelings. I mean, I say this constantly, but because you deal with big numbers with a large organization, and I say statistics are statistics until they happen to you, and then it's a fact. And so that fact is the one we have to make sure that we talk about. We can talk about number of illnesses per serving, and wow, that's a really low number. Yeah, it's a really low number. But the fact is there's still adverse outcomes when people consume certain servings of food. And so we have to acknowledge that. Back once again to the betterment. So our choices, our path is through betterment, making that number even smaller. And the way we do that is to make sure that we talk about the real adverse instances and outcomes that we have for failures in food safety systems.
So we're talking about the why behind food safety, and the importance of it, right? So I keep wanting to say, let's go to the phones, but Conrad, do you have something?
Well, I want
take a
to,
question from
I
online.
might be taking this in a different direction, but you said something that really resonated with me, and it kind of relates to a conversation that Phil and I had immediately before this, and this whole, the linear narrative, right? And most of the time we're not dealing with a linear narrative. And that poses challenges for us in terms of what do we share? When do we share it? Because that narrative will be written however it's heard, and we don't have control of it once it's out. And it's not that we want to control the story, but we need to be careful because of what Phil said. We could be affecting a product that is not really implicated in the outbreak, for instance. Or so that's, we were dreaming of a world where the journalists would also have food safety culture, right? And that they would be the kumbaya moment. So clearly we've had a number of non-linear narratives in the press over the last several months. So that has pointed out to you that some of the challenges that we face.
Well, we need to move on because we have lots of other questions, but thanks.
Yes.
So Vanessa, go ahead.
Yes, we've had a lot of questions about regulation and if the agencies are going to be regulating the food safety culture of different companies. So I will read Olivia Rossman's for you. What is the expectation on a regulatory scale to show proof how we are improving our food safety culture?
Well, let me just start with how you phrased the question, Vanessa. So we've had a lot of discussion. We hear this question all the time. Are you going to regulate food safety culture? From my perspective and from Don's perspective and others within the agency, it doesn't make sense to have a regulation around food safety culture. It almost is the antithesis of food safety culture, right? You want people to develop strong food safety cultures, not because there's a rule telling them to do so, that they want to do this for their customers, as you said it, right? And so, but there are regulatory things that we can do. We could potentially, as we evolve on our journey and as we learn more about ways that we can support food safety culture, it could be translated in our approaches to regulation or approaches to compliance and enforcement against our regulations, prioritization of our efforts. It could affect the way we interact. Maybe we'll change the way interactions occur at the field, for instance. Or we may opt to actually come out with guidance. It wouldn't be a rule, but some guidance like, hey, if you are embarking on food safety culture, here are some of the things that you might want to address. But creating a rule saying you must have food safety culture, or designing what a good food safety culture looks like and imposing it on the world is not our goal.
I would agree 100% from us. And I would take a little bit different tact also. And I would almost say that the regulations that we have on the books for food safety are a substitute for food safety culture. I mean, these are the baselines. We know that in the past, if you deviate into this area, there is going to be an issue. Therefore, I will put a regulation there. That is not to say you have to get there. HACCP tells me I don't tell industry exactly how to remove that hazard or how to mitigate it. But I think that if you think about it, a good food safety culture keeps you a long way away from violating, having any non-compliances with regulations. And so I would kind of argue that we do a bit, but there is no need for a specific regulation that says the food safety culture shall be X, Y, and Z, A, B, C, and we will check at these things. It should be evident in your daily performance of your establishments when the inspectors come in and see what you're doing.
I'm not a regulator. Is there anybody in the room from CFIA, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency? Nope. There might be someone on the phone. One of the things that CFIA did quite a number of years ago was that they embarked on a very detailed and validated risk assessment, right? Or risk characterization piece of work. And I see our good friends from McCormick nodding over there. But the very interesting piece about that is that they're looking at risk characterization, and there's an element of management, how management acts in there as well. It's a validated piece of work. It's very well published, and it helps the CFIA find out how best to utilize their resources. So that's one thing, but also who are those companies that they need to spend a little bit more time with. And I gotta wonder too, and sort of piggybacking on your point here, Phil, whether it's something like that, where it's more of a, there's an element of assessing management, and that can be done very objectively, I think, and it's reasonable to do that within regulations as well, I think, but quantifiable, objective, and then it goes into a risk characterization effort, right? I'm wondering something like that could work.
Yeah, and that's very interesting. So we haven't, and Conrad and I talked about this a little bit a while ago, but I don't know that I'm there yet with my own inspection force. I mean, I have an enviable situation in that my inspectors are there every day, right? They're there every shift in processing. If they're harvesting, they're there 100% of the time. And so I have the advantage of having an interaction at a very base level between industry and the regulator. And so I think that if I were to ask any one of my inspectors, they could tell you in their assignments which place has a good food safety culture and which one doesn't. But it might be very hard to define what exactly it is. You just know because the interactions are easier, the sharing is better, the conversations are deeper, and then you definitely go into some situations where where does it say in the regulations that you can ask me to do that, or you can ask for that information? And we know that that's not a productive environment for us. So we kind of do it on a day-to-day without quantifying it. And I think it's interesting, and I'm starting to try to think internally, how do we quantify it? Can we quantify it? And how will that be able to inform how we're doing our inspections better? But I haven't gotten very far on that yet.
So move on to another question, comment from the room. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Rebecca Ferrer from PepsiCo. I hope you're enjoying the Aquafina today. We often say, and I think it's been said publicly, that food safety is everyone's business. And we did talk here about how we can influence the top and the front line. And I find that conversation always falls within the food safety, quality, and supply chain groups. But throughout a large corporation, there are lots of functions that have an impact on food safety. IT and data have an impact on creating faster and better tools. Marketing has an impact on consumer trust. Procurement has an impact on what tools we purchase and what suppliers we use. So, in your experiences, what has have you seen best practices that you could share on how to get the message out to everyone in the organization?
It's a really good question and a very real question out there. Aligned to the corporate priorities. Because when an annual corporate priority or whatever, when everyone's focused on that, then it happens. And then it sticks. And if you can get food safety as your corporate priority, it feeds into everything you described, the consumer trust piece and the sales, all right? And it just feeds into marketing and the storytelling and the message, it feeds into everything. So get it into your corporate priorities is what I would be saying. And that's, I'm back to leadership again. So there you go.
Rebecca, I think it's an outstanding question, because I think it's where many companies are also at right now. There's been some energy and now needs to be translated into what it means for other functions. And as you well know, and many people in the audience as well, different functions have different subcultures. So I'm an engineer by trade. We're stubborn. We don't want to listen. And we know what's best, right? So, and I think you have to acknowledge that you have to sort of go hand in hand and then sit with the different functions and then say, okay, let's translate food safety into your functional responsibilities, your functional language, your functional subculture. We have some cheat sheets that goes along those lines where we did that with a number of companies. Here's engineering, here's finance, here's marketing. What are their food safety responsibilities? What are some sample food safety behaviors? But you have to develop that with the functions. You have to allow them to put it into their own language. You have to involve them in that conversation so that they have a little skin in the game, right?
So let's take one more question from the internet.
Yes, thank you. Alan Wyman asks, has the high turnover and shortage of trained staff made it harder to establish a stable, consistent food safety culture? If so, how are you compensating for this? Do you expect this to continue?
I think it's probably going to continue for a while. I think some sectors are getting, like food service got very, very badly hit, but everybody is getting hit in some fashion, and some people are turning away from the food industry. I think it can be retention is a really big deal. And I think that's when the culture of the company kicks in royally, big time, because you want to hang around. It's a company that respects you. It's a company that you can make a difference in. It's a company that you share their values. So I think in times like these, people tend to stick around with the company that they fit in with and belong with. And I think it's a help. But it is an issue out there, and there's a lot of movement out there right now. I'll stop because we only have a few minutes.
And I would say from my point of view, I kind of mentioned it before, but it's always a hard part. It's hard part for me to be able to compete as a federal agency with some of the salaries that in food production areas. But it is really, for me, the food safety culture, the reason why we really started talking a lot more about it is because for me, it is a retention tool. It is what my inspectors are most proud of. And I need to feel number one, proud of that and empowered, and so that they do feel even more proud and want to stay with this. So maybe they can make 50 cents more an hour somewhere else, but are they going to have the same impact that they do in this current position? So no doubt turnover for everybody is a big issue, especially with the ongoing COVID pandemic. But I think it is a challenge, but I think you can use this as a tool for retention, and it can be a positive for your organization.
I think we have time for one, maybe two more questions. I'll do this one and then this one, and I think we're getting close to the end.
Hi, thank you. I'm Liliana Casal-Wardle from the Atchison Group. Nice to see you all there. Great answers. To me, that there's an area where it's going to be difficult for the regulators. It's difficult for the industry, which is the supply chain controls, and how do you manage the food safety culture that's going to guarantee the ongoing quality and food safety of those ingredients that are coming from different locations globally and are suffering all the hurdles of being transported, being handled, produce coming from Chile or salmon coming again from Chile came to my mind because I'm Latin American, but and there's a lot of salmon, but thinking of all that and how the regulators are going to train the workforce to look at that area while they're on the sites with FSIS or they're assessing a facility with the FDA inspectors.
Well, I'll start off by saying that, you know, we're lucky because we're in, if it's the supply from one FSIS regulated establishment to another, then I have both ends covered. The rest of it, goes into FDA's world and our interaction with there. I'll say, first of all, that we have an ongoing and constant interaction between FDA and FSIS, both at the local level and at the national level. And those interactions are key to making sure that that part of the supply chain is going to be safe ultimately. And with that, this is a lot more FDA's.
Yeah, and
impact.
it's kind of not in my department, I guess, but you know, one thing we have been doing, and Lone is familiar with this, is we've started to train our field staff and other staff within the agency. Just a very basic sort of a food safety culture 101, you know, kind of being able to recognize it when you see it, not going in there and assessing, not giving them a checklist to do an inspection and then assess food safety culture, but that basic understanding of food safety culture, and then thinking about how we might want to move, progress further into other training later. And so I think that's an important first step on our part, to just raise awareness of food safety culture.
Thank you. I put on my stop hat now. So the Stop Foodborne Illness, I'm a stop board member, Amnesty, I'll put my hand up. The Alliance to Stop Foodborne Illness has got these initiatives underway, one of which is obviously food safety culture. And the idea is to share best practices with the 18 member companies back their supply chain. Okay, so that in turn will help as we're fostering food safety culture in the food industry. But it's just, there are tools out there, and I applaud what you guys are doing. And we're all trying to drive change ultimately to the consumer. And I think over to you.
As usual, great question. Thank you very much. I'm just sort of wondering if we as industry need to be a little different here and start looking at that. If we can put something like sustainability, animal welfare into our corporate social responsibility agendas that our consumers are looking hard at and evaluating us as companies on, why shouldn't food safety be part of that CSR agenda? And why can't you therefore have the requirement of your supply chain that they need to demonstrate to you that if they need to treat the chickens the way they're deserving to be chicken or to be treated, why shouldn't we say this is what we expect to see from your corporate culture and where food safety fits into that? So I think I'd love to see over the next 5-10 years that I'm sorry to say this, that we stop talking about food safety culture and we start talking about corporate social responsibility and organizational culture and how we look at risk. And I think you can push that throughout the supply chain.
Setting great goals for all of us for the next 5 to 10 years. Sir.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dominic with Goldberg's Group. So my question is related to the type of training we provide to the food safety team. So I know with busy company, most of the time they adopt the digital training, like having the employee sitting in front of a computer and then just bring the pass or fail. And for me, I haven't seen great result with this. It's just a checking box. And I would like to know your opinion on this because I'm a good fan of having hands-on training, face-to-face training, because the employee like this can see the fire in me and that can transmit for them to get on board. But when you send them in front of a computer, for me, all they have to do, they just copy the question and then write the answer, and then they don't remember anything after that. I would like to know your opinion on all of this platform.
Yep. So this is a whole different topic. And I'm looking over at Bertram here from Camden BRI because they just did a global training survey, right? And there's some good stuff in there you want to look at. But I'll also say that I think we have a very, very one-dimensional and candidly a very tiresome perspective on training in the food industry. We think we can sit people down and then we can check a box and then we can send them off on our lines and off we go, right? So I think we need to educate ourselves candidly on what does it mean to learn as adults? Is it just about passing knowledge? Is it about that we're actually expecting people to do something different with what they've just learned? Is it that we need to do some coaching on the line so that we can see that they're actually ongoingly evolving? So you're opening up a can of worms, sir, that we don't have time to discuss, but you're on the right path. And as an industry, I think we can do much more. And I'm sure that I'm sure that others would agree on that.
Can I play with those worms just
Yes,
for a
you
minute
can.
too? So
Hands off my worms.
I can tell you, and maybe Phil can say the same thing. This is not just food industry. We have all those types of trainings internally, maybe not on food safety culture, but and to me, it's representative of what Lone said, that a lack of a thoughtful approach about what is it we're trying to accomplish here with this training. And oftentimes some of the trainings that we are required to take, it's okay, we just want to make sure people can check this off the list. And that I think is indicative of the values of the organization. Is this really something that the organization values? If it were, then I think the training would be better. And so I think similarly with food safety culture, if you really value food safety and you want to make that top of mind, you need to figure out a way to train people so it's top of their mind too.
So now that we've spread our worms all over the place,